Hey everyone, this is Zan. Let's finally get to my Late Age Caelum national overview. Caelum is a magocracy of winged humanoids inhabiting the highest mountain peaks. There were three major clans led by semi-divine beings known as Yazads. Centuries ago, one clan was banished for tainting the sacred task of their seraphines and polluting the purifying flames. Now, with a new pretender god rising, that clan has returned and overthrown the magocracy with the power of a new, dark faith. These new Harab Seraphs are skilled in air, death, and earth magic. The famed ice crafters have now been replaced by magesmiths who forge weapons of iron and steel. These expert artisans have helped Caelum develop mighty citadels to rival the other nations of the age. And if you're just looking for a quick summary of how the nation plays, down below there should be a bookmark to that section near the end of the video. If not, stick around and we'll dive into the details. Let's talk about Late Age Caelum's unit roster. Caelum across the ages is known for their flying armies, which often are storm immune, have magic weapons, ice protection, and natural cold and shock resistance. Illwinter has split these traits by the color of the Caelian's wings, denoting their heritage. White-winged Caelians tend to be physically weaker, more cold resistance, but carry magical weapons and armor. Brown and black-winged Caelians tend to be physically stronger and use good, but not magical, mundane weapons and armor. Gray-winged Caelians have average physical stats, are able to fly in storms, and are naturally cold and shock resistant. These gray-winged Caelians also tend to use magic weapons. The majority of Caelians can fly, which means that other units without flying do not get a charge bonus against them. It allows them to ignore terrain with their high map move on the strategic map. Flying also doubles the siege strength, defense, and patrol values of the units, making it so that almost all Late Age Caelum armies are able to expertly defend their forts, but also instantly break down the walls of enemy forts. The Storm Immune trait allows units to avoid the penalties that come with the Storm spell. These penalties traditionally are the inability to fly in storms, a precision penalty, and half of ranged projectiles not firing. While traditionally this is a good trait, there is a scenario you may not want full coverage of it. When you're fighting an enemy that's casting Wailing Winds, and you're doing it yourself, it may be worth bringing some non-storm flyers. The reason is, if both sides are casting the spell, and both sides decide to rout almost simultaneously, your flying units will leave the battlefield before the enemy will, and you will probably lose the battle first. If you have Storm up, and not all of your flyers are Storm immune, they're going to very slowly walk across the field in retreat, and there's a greater chance that you're going to win the battle at this point, because your flyers typically are going to be on the enemy side of the field and further from the retreat point. Moving back to the Caelians themselves, the white and gray-winged Caelians are going to be using magical swords and spears. Although the stats they provide no longer hold up very well in the late age, they're critical for facing units that are ethereal, invulnerable, or under effect of the spell Fog Warriors. Outside of these scenarios, it's okay to favor the mundane weapons for the nation as they do have better stats. Ice protection is very good defensively, but must be carefully considered when you're attacking other nations, who might not always have cold dominion. It increases the protection in cold, but also decreases it in heat. Cold and shock resistance can be used to reduce friendly fire from any evocation, or to be more resistant to battlefield enchantments like Grip of Winter or Wrathful Skies. And it's definitely worth noting that the majority of your mages as Late Age Caelum do not have these resistances naturally. And although it's not listed here on the screen, it's worth talking a little bit about the Caelian weapons. The roster primarily uses lances, some swords, and a composite bow. The bow would normally be a good answer against lightly armored crossbowmen, but can potentially cause a lot of friendly fire if the rest of your army has flown into melee with the same targets. Flying Lancers have a charge bonus of size times 2, which means that the average size 3 Caelian is actually going to do an additional 6 damage on their first strike, which is why a lot of Caelian players tend to prefer it. Swords, though, often have better stats and do more damage than these spears, but they can be repelled and they have no charge bonus. In a longer fight, though, it's very common that the swords are going to outdamage the spears. In the later half of the game, it's worth keeping in mind a spell called Skeletal Legion. What this spell does is that it gives the entire army pierce resistance, which is going to reduce pierce damage by half. If your entire army is made of Caelian Lancers, this could lead to a pretty difficult battle. In short, a good Caelian player is going to tailor their army to the enemy that they're facing. Brown and Black Wing Caelians are going to boast the best stats and equipment, but they may fall off in the later game or against certain enemies without their magical weapons and resistances. White Wing Caelians tend to have superior gear and cold resistance, but are frail and often suffer in the heat. Grey Wing Caelians are the most common used. They often have good physical stats, a magical spear, and don't always have ice protection. The Spirehorn Warrior is the traditional unit that is used because it works well in all situations. The Storm Guard is a more elite version of that unit, but does actually have ice protection. In addition to 8 cold and shock resistance versus the Spirehorn Warrior's 5. The typical Caelian army progression starts with the brown and black wing troops, which have better equipment and are physically stronger. Then it will begin to transition to Spirehorn Warriors, Storm Guard, and Area Light Infantry for their magic lances and swords. Let's finally talk about the mammoth in the room. The sacred units. There's actually two, a lightly armored archer and a heavily armored crossbowman. Since neither of them fly, I don't honestly think they are worth giving up the flying map move that the nation is famous for. The archer is just overall weak, but it is inexpensive. The crossbowman is actually very good, but prohibitively slow. It has super heavy armor and natural reinvigoration to counter most of the downsides of that armor. Both synergize very well with weapon blesses, and they can actually deliver that from range. The Earthbound actually kind of takes a lot of buffs and blesses very well. So there might be something there, but it's covered in too much anti-synergy for me. The actual recruitable mammoth is pretty good too. It provides a way to trample hard targets that would otherwise give the rest of your roster a pretty hard time. We just have to be mindful that it has an expensive price tag and ridiculously low magic resistance. So let's talk about late age Caelum's recruitable commanders. The Area Scout is your humble 25 gold scout, but actually comes with a lot of map move and is flying, so moving them around is going to be pretty easy, and it's pretty worth that 25 gold cost. I recruit them out of forts all the time. Commander-wise, you've got two options. You have a 70 gold for 80 leadership that is very well armored and has a +1 morale bonus commander. The Storm General is fantastic. And you also have a Raven Lord, 50 gold for 40 leadership, but is stealthy. They're both really good, and it just depends if you want a stealthy commander or one that provides a morale bonus. One neat trick you can do with the Sword General is, since they have this ice protection value of 2, it's not actually attached to the armor they're using. So if you give him an Armor of Knights, for example, this unit can easily get up to 28-29 protection on its own. And that's with no natural protection. So with a few buffs, you can get this guy to 36, 37 protection pretty easily and give him some equipment, and you have a pretty hard thug or a good in-army thug that maybe you give a great sword of sharpness to and have it hit hard targets. You never know. Moving on to your mages, we have the Harab Seraph, which is your primary battle mage outside of your capital. And there's a lot of issues with this guy, and most of that stems from their paths. So they're an Air 1, Death 1 guaranteed, of which we know that although those are good paths, having them at 1 is kind of awkward and there's not really much to do there. But then the problem happens when you go to their randoms and you find out they have 5 randoms. So if you get a random in Air or Death to make either of the paths 2, well, okay, now this is a very good mage. An Air 2 mage is fantastic. It cloud trapezes it, air elementals, it does lightning invocations. A Death 2 mage can Horde of Skeletons. Very, very good. Shadow Blasts. All the good stuff. The problem is when you have an Air 1, Death 1, Fire 1, or Water 1, Earth 1. They aren't necessarily bad, but they're going to need a lot of gems in order to be good. And you're playing in the late age where every gem is precious, and you can't really afford to be doing that. So although you do want those paths, you might not necessarily want them all in the same mage. And having so many randoms is going to make it difficult to get a reliable combat mage out of this guy. So when you recruit them, you don't know if you're going to be able to actually use it effectively in combat. Again, without gems or boosters. Fire and Earth can easily use a gem to earth power, phoenix power, and during combat become useful. Water can use a gem to cast quickness, or even at water 1 they can cast frozen heart, but you shouldn't really need to be doing that. The air and death variety don't cost anything to be useful. So it's pretty tough that they are very unreliable. We're going to move on to the Iron Crafter, and this is probably the star mage of the nation outside of the capital. It costs 45 gold for 7 research, which is great. In Magic 3, it's 45 gold for 10 research. Wow. It's an Earth 1, which, although we just complained about it 2 seconds ago, is actually really good on this guy because, again, he's 45 gold. He's a third of the price of the other guy. They have a resource bonus of 10, and this is a very resource-intensive nation, or it can be, depending how you want to play it. And it also has a forge bonus, which, if you remember, I was talking earlier about giving some of your storm generals armor of knights and maybe a great sword of sharpness, because that's going to skyrocket their combat effectiveness rather than just have them be some dude sitting behind your units. So overall, the Ironcrafter is really, really good. One thing too, if you've played with, say, Lucid's casting mod, a lot of Earth mages you're going to Earth power them. Typically, they're going to be an Earth 2, Earth powered into Earth 3, and they're going to like to cast Blade Wind. The Ironcrafter, if you give him a gem, again, these are precious, be very careful when you use them. He'll Earth power himself to Earth 2, and what's going to happen is when you set them on Advance and Cast, instead of casting Blade Wind, they can't, they're actually going to use a lot of Earth Meld, which your units, because they're flyers, are completely immune to. There's no friendly fire issue going on there. So that's actually pretty neat about these guys. We're going to move to the Caretaker, and this guy has 2 jobs, really. He's going to build temples for you, and he's going to recall your god if for whatever reason he died. That's it. Because if you need that Earth 1 path, you can have an Ironcrafter, and if you need Death 1 path, I'd rather make a Harab Seraph who at least has a tiny chance of being useful. That's pretty much it. Now, in their capital, you have the Caelum Seraph, which is actually really damn good. And I wish this guy was recruit anywhere. Because 125 gold for these 3 paths is, 1, it's very cheap, and 2, because it has that Air 2 path, is guaranteed to be very good. Unfortunately, it's going to be in your capital, and it's going to compete with your next mage, who is absolutely critical for this nation to function. It's going to be tough. The only saving grace he has, or I guess the 2 saving graces, is each one of these is very powerful for very cheap, and they only cost 2 recruitment points, so you get twice as many of these as your other mage. Your final mage is the Harab Elder. These guys tend to be old age, which, we'll talk about dealing with that later. But if you look at their paths, they're all guaranteed to be Air 2 and Death 2. They also have this Earth 1 path, but by the grace of being an Air 2 or Death 2 mage, either one of those alone, you're already fantastic. The fact that they're both means they're a lot more versatile. And now, when you add in that Earth 1 path, that means they can also protect themselves by casting something like Iron Skin or Temper Flesh, in addition to maybe a Mistform, or with a gem, or a Skull Staff, Soul Vortex. They're all pretty damn good, and you're going to want to take care of every single one of these, and you just want as many of them as possible. Moving on to their randoms. Their randoms are actually just going to exemplify what they can already do, because although these are the same randoms as the regular Seraphs, because you have that Air 2 Death 2, you're guaranteed to already be doing good. But now you can make it exponentially better. Your Air randoms are your way to get into Storm, Wrathful Skies, Fog Warriors. Your Earth randoms get you Strength of Giants, Legions of Steel, Weapons of Sharpness. Your Death randoms are going to be able to operate as solo thugs with Invulnerability, Soul Vortex. They're going to cast Winds of Death. They're going to cast Rigor Mortis if you need it. They're going to cast Drain Life. They're fantastic. Your Water and Fire randoms, I mean, they exist. The Fire randoms with the Skull Staff can cast Banefire, which is cool. The Water random can cast Stygian Rains, which helps protect your army. because most of the time your army is going to have only magic weapons and the enemy might not have that luxury. So quite literally, every random for these guys is really damn good, which is what makes them so precious. And one of the reasons why I actually recommend twice spawning them. Personally, I'm not a fan of twice spawning your mages. I think your death gems can go to do literally anything else. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me. A lot of people like doing that. But this guy, this Harab Elder, is absolutely critical for a nation, and you need as many as possible. So twice spawning them is an insurance that even if he dies, you get him back, and odds are it's going to be on a better chassis that can now do different things than he could while alive. He can be a solo thug, he can be a super combatant, it can cast rigor mortis and operate under those situations. So they're pretty damn good, and I can't stress enough that you want to make a million of these, which is sad because you also want these. Because outside of your capital, things aren't looking too good. You're going to have a lot of Iron Crafters, you're going to have a lot of Harab Seraphs, and the majority of these Seraphs are not going to be good. Moving on from the recruitable commanders, we're going to go to the summon units and the summon commanders. We're going to start with the units because it's quick. You've got two options, the Yazad and the Daeva. Both of them cost you 15 gems of either Astral or Death to summon, and you get 6 per cast. They're both actually really good sacred units. They're hard hitters with this magical lance. One of them is going to have a helmet and awe. The other one has no helmet, but has fear and chaos power. It's debatable which one you'd prefer, but Late Age Caelum specifically is going to have an easier time summoning these Daevas that thrive in chaos power. They're honestly quite good and probably worth blessing. The issue is just getting enough of them to matter. Their role is going to be to be spread out within your army and just be an extra heavy hitter for the rest of your units. You know, you give them some very strong strength bless, maybe some weapon bless or something offensive, and then you just kind of hope that they don't get hit, that the mundane unit next to them does, and they'll be able to take down hard targets that the rest of your army might not be able to. We'll move on now to the mages. And the mages and the commanders, they're all great once you have them, but they're usually expensive to get. So the only one that isn't kind of great is going to be the Jahi, which is a Dream Seductress with no body slot, meaning this protection 0 is hard to resolve. They scale walls, which is good, but because it's Dream Seduction as opposed to regular seduction, it's very unreliable they're going to actually do anything with it. Regular seduction is just going to be a morale check on whether you convert the commander you're seducing or have an assassination battle. Dream Seduction has an additional magic resistance check before that happens. I don't know if I would want to pay 15 death gems for that unreliability. The likely most used one is going to be the Ahurani, and although the magic paths aren't great, the main use of them is actually their disease healer ability, keeping your old age mages alive. Again, your Harab Seraphs are critical for the nation to succeed, so you likely want to do anything you can to keep them alive. So if you don't have the Unaging Bless, you definitely should have some way to get yourself an Ahurani who's going to be able to cure the disease on them, because you really don't want to lose one to disease. That's a very big waste. The next summon that can be very useful is the Ancestral Fervashi. It costs 30 Astral Pearls to make, and you probably don't want too many, but you definitely want at least 1 or 2. And that's beside their major magic paths, it's going to be this Holy 3. This Holy 3 with 34 mat move, full slots, and going back to their magic paths, they can magic phase with either of these. These are almost perfect Throne Flamers. They have all the resistances. Well, they don't have cold resistance, but they have a lot of hit points. So what you can do is you can give them 7-mount stride boots, which bumps their mat move up to 48 if you need it. They can really go anywhere between 48 mat move and flying. You can give them a shade mail to make them stealthy, or you can just magic phase them onto your fort. They don't need to participate in the battle is the main point, because a lot of people look at this and they say, oh, well, it's going to get magic dueled. Well, who said it had to fight? If you make it stealthy with your national path of Earth and Death, it can literally be anywhere and claim anything. And depending on your strategy, if you're throne rushing or so, you can have multiple of these to claim all the thrones at once, because you don't have recruitable Holy Threes. This is a very good mage, very specifically for throne claiming, probably one of the better ones in the game. In a pinch, it can function as a Wrathful Skies caster because it can empower itself with Astral. To hit Air 4, it can do Storm, and then it can Wrathful Skies, which is a very good spell to combo with your Storm Guard, who have natural shock resistance, or anything else. So they're very good in combat, but they're also very expensive, and you just need to keep that in mind. 30 Astral Pearls in the late age is a lot. Now, the rest of the mages are a roulette that you might not be comfortable spending the gems for. So the roulette mages you're going to summon come from Conjuration. You have either Call Yada, just 40 death gems, or Call Greater Deva for 60. Alternatively, you have Call Celestial Yazad for 40 Astral Pearls, or Call Amesha Spenta for 60. And these are very debatable spells to do, especially with late age gems, because they're very expensive and you don't know what you're going to get. There might be a mage that you want, but there's no guarantee you get it. So the 60 cost ones get you something like this, the Spenta of Animals for 5 nature magic, which is fantastic. It's also Holy 3 for throne claiming. And the Deva one could give you something like this guy, or girl, with Earth 3, Fire 4, Death 2. Very good paths, again, but one, do you have 60 death gems to spend? And two, is this what you want out of your 60 death gems? That can be difficult to afford and then difficult to use after. The lower tier spells, the Call Yada for 40 death gems and the Call Celestial Yazad for 40 pearls, although they give you weaker mages, I do think they're a little bit more affordable, and it's definitely worth casting either of them at least once or twice, especially for late age Caelum, the Call Yada one, because all 4 of the options you can get are good. The one you really want, in my opinion, is going to be this one. So Call Yada for 40 death can give you a Pyrrhica, which again, it has all this dream seduction stuff, but we don't care about that. We just care about this beautiful Blood 3 path that it has, and this Death 2 path, which is going to make it a natural vampire summoner if you give it boosters, or even an Empower. A lot of my strategy in my late age Caelum game revolved around getting these to make me vampires and break me hard into blood. The problem is, let's say you're trying to repeat the same thing I did and do your own Call Yada and break into blood. There's a chance that something like this happens, and you just get this guy, the actual namesake of the spell, who's a Fire 3 Death 3, and now don't get me wrong, you need this too. You also need a Fire 3 Death 3 because Fire 3 is going to break you into higher fire paths. But do you need 3 of them? And therein lies the issue with the spell. I mean, here, this is the opposite. The Call Celestial Yazad, you get an Air 4 Astral 2, you got 2 of them. They're both fantastic mages. You definitely need and want these because they're gonna do Wrathful Skies, they're gonna do Storm, they're gonna do Fog Warriors. But were you really hoping to get 2 of the same one? You didn't want something like an Earth Nature Mage that's gonna cast Gaia's Blessing. It's just unreliable, and if you go into it expecting a specific mage, the odds aren't necessarily in your favor. But I do think all of the mages that you get are good. So you really have to make that decision yourself on, are you okay getting any good mage, or do you need a very specific one? On top of that, do you have other uses for those gems? Death gems in particular are going to be very, very used or needed by your nation for just about any little thing you do, from skull staves to twice boarding to potentially if you have a sacred strategy rolling around Daevas. Can you afford to be spending 40 or 60 at a time to roulette and mage? It depends on your game situation. Same thing for Astral Pearls, although the difference now with the Astral Pearls is, do you even have the mage to start with that's going to summon these Yazads? It's definitely up for debate, but it's more so a personal decision on, are you willing to spend these gems, Death or Astral, to maybe get a good mage? If you're playing in a situation where you just have so many gems you don't know what to do with, or it's so late in the game that you just need big casters, you don't care, yeah, for sure. Probably good spells. You just need to be very careful in leveraging the opportunity cost of what 60 death gems would have gotten you versus a mage like this. Now that we've wrapped up the summoned and recruitable commanders, we can talk about the recommended spells for the nation. First and foremost, center field is going to be Wailing Winds. Your Death Random Harab Seraphs and all of your Harab Elders can cast this. They might need a Skull Staff if they're only Death 2, but this is absolutely a critical spell for your nation to use. You want it in absolutely every battle. It's going to be a complete menace to a lot of nations who just have no answer to it because in Dominions 5, currently, as of this recording, there isn't much of an answer to it. Not an easy and simple one, especially around the time that it's learned. Alongside Wailing Winds, Winds of Death is another spell that's going to be very useful for this nation. It's going to trigger a magic resistance check to the entire battlefield, your side included, and whoever fails is going to start to decay. This is very abusable by your nation if you combine it with Cloud Trapeze for Magic Phase movement and a Ring of Returning from Astral Magic. You give your mage some armor, not too much, you still want to take damage. Have him jump into a fight. He's going to cast Winds of Death. The enemy, in some way, shape, or form, is going to damage him. Stray crossbow bolt, a flying harpy, who knows? As long as it doesn't kill him in one hit, he's going to get sent back to the capital, ready to Cloud Trapeze again and do this all the next turn. In the meantime, the battlefields, both sides again, are going to take a lot of turns of decay damage, which, especially to humans, is very deadly. It's very useful for the nation to whittle down their enemies that they might not otherwise be ready to fight. Moving on to more traditional spells, we've got all these earth magic spells, which you'd expect Late Age Caelum's all about the air magic, but boy, were you wrong. Their air magic's not good enough to be the centerpiece of their nation. So you've got Earth Meld and Maws of the Earth. Talk about them together. One is smaller research and not deadly, but regardless, your units, since they all fly, are immune to both of these spells. They're going to reduce the defense of the enemy. In the Maws of the Earth's case, they're also going to damage them. They're pretty easy for your cap-only mages to cast. All of your other mages, unfortunately, outside of capital, the best is Earth 1, so you're going to need to Earth Power with a gem, or use Earth Boots, and then potentially use more gems to cast these spells. Legions of Steel and Strength of Giants, same deal. They're going to be critical to getting your units and their magical lances and armor up to par for the age. It's a lot of the same equipment that they used in the early and middle age, and it just hasn't kept up with the competition. It just has that benefit of being magical, which you cannot trade that for anything. Weapons of Sharpness, just to stay on track of the Earth magic, is another way that you're going to keep your forces up to par because there's going to definitely be a window where your enemies have, say, Mass Protection, Marble Warriors, some sort of buff that they can apply in mass to their units that's going to cause your otherwise frail or physically weak Caelians to stop doing any damage to them, and it's not going to look pretty. Weapons of Sharpness is how you stay in the game. Even if your lance charge is only hitting for 17, 18 damage, whatnot, if it's armor piercing damage, you're good to go. You're going to chip away at the enemy, and you're back to being competitive all the way up to Army of Gold levels and all that craziness. Our actual pure air spells are going to be Summon Air Elemental. It's absurdly expensive to cast this as Late Age Caelum, as you don't have very many Air 3s and you don't have a lot of access to Storm. But as the age tends to rely less and less on Sacreds, the potential that an Air Elemental has, especially a lot of them, to do damage is even greater than, say, the other ages. So although it's harder for you to cast it, when you do cast it, if you do so under the right situations with Storm Up, when you have a bunch of your Storm Flyers to help, fight alongside of it, an Air Elemental would be very devastating. Cloud Trapeze wasn't originally going to be on this list, but I did remember a game where it was turned 40 or 50 something, and we needed a Caelum to magic phase onto a fort to stop the run rush. And that Caelum said, I don't have Cloud Trapeze. And it baffled myself. I think we were playing with Lucid. It baffled Lucid. And I just thought that, well, if one player decided to not research this by turn 50 something, that means that maybe not everyone knows that it's a critical spell for any nation. So please make sure to get Cloud Trees because it's going to allow you to pull off a lot more shenanigans. It's going to allow you to influence the enemy army, influence your own army movements a lot more, be it moving your troops faster between provinces or attacking the enemy, let's say combining Cloud Trapeze with Winds of Death to kind of go in the magic phase, fight an army, debilitate them, get out, and then the normal phase of combat's going to happen anyways. So it's a very, very key spell, and there's definitely a huge skill ceiling on where you can get with using it. So just know that it exists, and it's pretty critical for combining with some of the other spells here, especially since all of your cap-only mages, your Harab Elders, are Air 2. And the last recommended spell, of course, is going to be Horde of Skeletons. It's a fan favorite for a reason. It's very powerful. It's very good for raiding your Harab Seraphs. Some of them can cast it without help, and that alone makes it good. Your Harab Elders can use this to raid, especially since they can protect themselves with air magic, earth magic, and just spam out Horde of Skeletons to fight, let's say your opponent's using Rigor Mortis against you, or what have you, just dozens and dozens of skeletons sometimes solves a lot of problems. Now, let's be honest. I can fit a minigame for any path for late age Caelum. Their paths aren't too high, and although they have wide paths, they're so low you can't really do too much with them. We're just going to keep this to the top 3 that I think are important for them, just because I don't want to put all 8 paths here. Now, we're going to start with everyone's favorite, nature. Just as with late age Agartha, nature is absolutely critical for Caelum. The majority of your armies are going to be mundane troops that are susceptible to foul vapors. You don't have an easy time countering Grip of Winter or Heat from Hell, which is going to make relief very important. And there's a lot of really good items to forge that really need nature. So just having nature mages forge things is going to supercharge the ability to keep your Harab Seraphs alive or even combat capable as thugs or even super combatants after they've been twice born. Unfortunately, it's not easy to start the climb. You don't really have any native tools for it. So you just got to kind of find whatever nature mage you find and trade or empower your way up. Between the old age on your Harab Seraphs and the importance of climbing nature for this nation, it's a really easy recommendation to take it on your pretender. And if you don't need a bless from it, you can just take on aging, and that's going to save you a lot of a headache in keeping your Harab Seraphs alive. As a tiny alternative, you can technically cheat your way straight to the top if you're willing to spend a lot of Astral Pearls on your roulette summons. You can get lucky and your first Yazad or Spadta is a really good nature mage, but the odds, I don't think they're in your favor, but you can certainly try. The next one we're going to cover is the Astral minigame. This one can be tough as finding indies outside of Thrones in the late age is really rare. If you watch my playthrough, I eventually had to give up and hard empowered a Harab Seraph in Astral so I can get golems. It's very important to have Astral because you really, really need anti-magic in late game battles. You run the risk of getting attacked by people casting Winds of Death, which, I mean, you're going to be doing that to everyone, so maybe they want to do it back. Master and Slave, or just any other MR check that can happen, which might just kill a lot of your units. I mean, even Sleep Cloud will do it. Technically, you might also want Astral if you want to dip into your Yazad summons, but I'm not really sure how I feel about doing that yet. And it's also important to know the entire minigame, you can just clear it by your pretender choice, but I don't think it's as necessary as nature is. And the final minigame is going to be a bit bloody, and we're going straight into the blood minigame. This one applies to a lot of nations, but I think late age Caelum really benefits from it. Although you kind of have to start pretty rough with scouts, like I think like I did. You can also skip straight into getting, Call Yada and then hoping you get a Blood Pyrika. But for the most part, you're going to start with scouts. You're going to hunt your way up. You have an advantage patrolling through Watchers. You're one of the few nations that can actually natively summon Watchers, which is going to make patrolling really easy. So it doesn't matter if you pump a province full of, 20, 30 scouts trying to blood hunt if you have enough Watchers there to patrol it. But what ends up happening is later on, if you do summon Yadas and try to get a Paraka, they can very easily summon vampires. And once you have your first vampires, you're in, you're done, you're good to go. Rush of Strength from a vampire is probably one of the most quality of life spells you can have as late age Caelum because it's going to free your Harab Seraphs from having to cast Strength of Giants. The majority of your army is size 3, which means those spells aren't as effective as they would be for some other human nation. If your strategy in battle does not involve casting Storm, Lifelong Protection is also really, really damn good. It's never bad to have that. One other thing, especially with vampires, and they're probably the key part for this, is those vampires, but as you go fighting someone, you start raiding them with small squads of your lancers, you might run into PD dumps, province defense dumps, that are too high for small raiding parties to deal with. You'd have to send a large force, which can then be countered by literally anything else. Having these strong, stealthy vampires is going to make it really easy to clear those out. Say you run into a dump of 40 province defense, you just send a vampire with some basic gear, and they're going to clear it out without a problem. If you do this enough, your opponent's likely not going to make more of these dumps, and it's going to be easy for you to just keep raiding them with very small non-committal forces. The last thing Blood might really help you with is if you don't have too many Death 2 mages or combat ready Death 2 mages, you actually have a little bit of a weakness to hard targets like super combatants or very strong thugs. And having blood magic in your armies to be able to cast Leech, Life for a Life, or depending on the mage, send to Inferno, send to Coquitos, that's going to help you a lot in clearing out those hard targets. To summarize Caelum in the Late Age, they have a very unique playstyle that often will require advanced planning and decisive engagements. Your entire roster has high map move, with very few exceptions, enabling you to rapidly redeploy forces, project power at extraordinary distances, raid with near impunity, and converge for decisive battles. Although your Caelians are frail, they pack punch with their flying charges and are always threatening the enemy backline. The traditional question enemies will often face is whether to group their forces together and risk being hit by thunderstrikes and mauls of the earth, or spread them out and risk being overwhelmed by mass flyers or air elementals. Always keep your opponents guessing, both on the tactical and the strategic map. On the strategic map, you want to overwhelm your opponents with large, mobile armies that can raid provinces at unexpected ranges, especially with the new stealthy Raven Guard. I believe it's best to avoid a major confrontation and focus on disrupting your enemy infrastructure for as long as possible with your mobile armies. You can force your opponent to choose which fort to defend by abusing the massive Caelian siege strength and simultaneously attacking multiple forts at once. This strategy is going to help guide enemy armies right where you want them, where you can bring in mages from a long distance away to help your army deliver the killing blow. This strategy is the result of the Harab Elder Capital Mage being very versatile and powerful, and the any Fort Harab Seraph being fairly unreliable. This way, you keep your elders only for major fights and reduce the chances of them dying in unimportant battles. I personally prefer having a strong super combatant like pretender that can deliver the killing blow on its own, further reducing the risk on the Harab elders and providing a powerful alternative to the traditional magic bats of the nation. Your primary unit throughout the game is going to be the Spirehorn Warrior. It's the most versatile in your roster due to its magic weapon, low price points, and fair resistances. Early game, if you find yourself in a situation where you don't need those advantages though, I would recommend using the various Raptor units, the brown or black one ones, since they often have superior stats and equipment. The Spirehorn Warriors, though, will really start showing their frailty in the late game, even after you're able to cast Army of Gold. So you're going to likely want to start transitioning to Stormguard whenever you can, maybe after your first war. Just be careful fighting in the Heat Dominion. Don't forget in the late game too that you want to recruit the area light infantry almost entirely because they have swords and they're going to help prevent the spell Skeletal Legion from invalidating your entire army. Speaking of spells, you want to lean into buffing your units a lot more than the Caelums of the earlier ages. Your access to earth magic means it's easier to increase the stopping power and protection of most of your units through spells like Weapons of Sharpness, Strength of Giants, and Legions of Steel. Don't forget to use the new Death and Air crosspath in combat either with spells like Wailing Winds and Winds of Death. They're absurdly powerful. Your most produced mage outside the capital should be the Ironcrafters, which not only are they excellent researchers, but they allow you to field a lot more Stormguard than your resources would otherwise allow you in the late game. Playing the roulette with Caelum's national summons can be scary, but I don't necessarily think it's bad, since almost all the mages you get are fantastic. The issue I have comes from relying on summoning a specific mage for your strategy to work. You just might not get it, no matter how many times you cast it. Sometimes it's like that. This brings me to the last point for the nation, and that is having a plan for the late game. You can have a pretender that breaks you into necessary late game magic, since the national paths of the nation are fairly rigid and make it difficult to climb any one magic path without a lucky random or an independent mage. The nation itself, though, has a pretty strong early and mid game, but really starts to show its weaknesses a little after turn 60 on average. So you might just want to have a plan to end the game early. With that said, that's the end of the overview, and hope you enjoyed it. See you guys next time.